Hello all, welcome to another Camber video. Today is not going to be super in-depth. I kind of lost my mind a little bit making the last video, so I'm going to do something a little bit more lighthearted, less, I guess, targeted towards anybody specifically. But I'm going to talk about something which I love to bring up. It's my favorite topic. When I pull up to the function and I want to mess up the vibe, this is exactly what I love talking about to new people that I don't know, is the fact that I'm a microwave hater. I'll just be straight up. I don't like microwave food. I don't think it's that hot of a take, but it gets really overbearing when I start talking about the chemistry behind it, which is what I'm going to be talking about today, specifically talking about the Maillard effect or the Maillard reaction, which is a series of reactions that happens when you heat food and is really the prime, I guess, reason why I think that I'm correct in my assessment that microwave food sucks and you shouldn't be using the microwave. If you're looking for the short reason why microwave food sucks, it's because it doesn't get as hot as if you're using other types of ways to heat up food. But let's just hop into it. Why do microwaves suck? So, just getting started, I said that microwaves suck because they, for lack of better words, don't have as much of this Maillard reaction going on. So, what is the Maillard reaction? Basically, there's this one physician slash chemist, Louis or Louis. I'm sorry, I'm not French. Louis Camille Maillard, who, as I said, born and raised in France, and in 1912, he was studying amino acids and sugars and how they interact, trying to understand how this process causes the browning of food. So, probably when you cook food, it starts getting a little bit more brown and it starts smelling a lot better. What is the reason for this? Well, this is what Maillard here basically started working on in 1912. Nobody really thought much of it. And then it took until two world wars later in the 1950s for people to start actually picking up his research and seeing what he was working with. And there's many different types that food can become brown, so or have browning happen. So I'm going to talk about the two other ways apart from Maillard reaction just really quickly here. So the first one is a type of browning that you see when you have fruit or vegetables and you cut them and you just let them sit in the air and you see that they start getting worse quality. They start browning a little bit. For example, if you cut an apple in half, leave it sitting out, it's going to start getting that brown like fuzz on it. What is happening there? Well, this happens through an enzymatic process, meaning that you have some enzyme or basically this clump of proteins which together functions to speed up some reaction which normally takes place, makes this reaction happen a lot more frequently. So in fruits, what's happening is that they have basically polyphenols, which is basically just a molecule that acts as an antioxidant. So, just a little refresher, antioxidants basically help protect from free radicals or reactive oxygen species, which, very generally speaking, is when you have some type of molecule, usually oxygen, which only has 7 electrons around it, which, as you know, normally if it's sharing electrons, it normally has 6 and it wants to get 2 more. So if it has 7, it's already really close to the octet and it's going to want to steal its electron from somewhere. It gets pretty dangerous when you have these free radicals or reactive oxygen species in your cell, because then this oxygen will want to take it from maybe an enzyme, maybe a lipid, or maybe your DNA, and it's going to take an electron away and cause that structure to get messed up, and is one of the reasons why we think we age, but that's an aside. So basically, polyphenols are these molecules which naturally have some sort of function. If you have these polyphenols, they can react with an enzyme called polyphenol oxidase, where this enzyme with oxygen converts this antioxidant into a quinone. Basically, what happens with this quinone is then you have free amino acids or proteins, they start latching onto this quinone and start polymerizing and creating melanin slash the brown pigmentation that you see when you leave fruit exposed to the oxygen. They get oxidized, for lack of better words. There's also a different type of browning, which is the caramelization that you see when you have sugar introduced to high heat conditions. So, what is happening there? Basically, there's this breakdown of sugars. So, for example, when you have sucrose, which is table sugar, it's made up of glucose and fructose. And when you heat it, you basically break that bond through condensation. You release some water and you get glucose and fructose. And then glucose and fructose can be involved in a series of reactions to make these types of colored slash aromatic compounds, which are representative of the characteristic, I guess, caramel look that you see when you heat up sugar. So these are just some of the, I guess, you have furan, diacetyl, maltol. Just a quick aside about ethyl acetate. I've seen people say stuff like, oh, don't eat this, it has ethyl acetate, antifreeze has ethyl acetate. And really, when people say this, it just shows that they know nothing about chemistry, because just because something is an antifreeze doesn't mean that it's not safe to consume. For example, if you are a Costco enjoyer such as myself, I really enjoy the Costco blueberry muffins, but they also have ethyl acetate in them, and it's just a very common chemical that's seen in very many parts everywhere in the world in any product you look in. So just because somebody is yelling that there's this chemical in the thing you're eating doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. But that's an aside. So we've seen you have this oxidation that happens when you leave fruit out, you have caramelization, and this last one is the Maillard effect. So the Maillard effect is a non-enzymatic process, meaning that you don't require an enzyme for this process to take place. It's just something that happens. So just the basics of the Maillard reaction, or when I say the Maillard reaction, it's basically a sequence of reactions which form colored slash aromatic compounds which increase the tastefulness of the food that you get. So you basically start with proteins, they react with sugars under heat conditions, and then that's how you get food to taste better when you cook it versus before it's cooked. So looking at the actual structure of what sugars look like, here I'm just looking at, you have like the Fisher representation and the Haworth representation of what a sugar looks like. These three bars just show that the structures on left and right are synonymous. They are the same thing, but just drawn in different ways, because I'll be showing these sugars in different ways. So basically, when you have this Maillard reaction happening, what is going on is that you have the, I guess, carbonyl group or carboxyl. I'm honestly not sure if that's the correct term. Basically, the circled brown thing on the sugar is going to react with the circled blue thing of a free amino group on an amino acid. Just to remind you, amino acids are made up of an amino group and a carboxyl group. And if you have a synthesized protein or enzyme, all of those amino and carboxyl groups are going to be taken up except for the N and C terminus. So even if you have an enzyme, it could potentially react with the sugar to give you a Maillard product, I guess. Once you have that reaction take place, you have a glycosylamine. And then from there, circled in red, I'm just showing that this double bond in between the carbon and carbon could go from carbon-carbon to carbon-oxygen. And then you basically shift those electrons to create an Amadori product, which from there, this can further undergo other types of reactions, and you can get, for example, reductones. There's also showing on the right just other types of compounds that can be made from the Maillard reaction and what type of, I guess, aroma or flavor they give you when they happen. But looking at reductones, these are just one part one intermediate product that you can get from the Maillard reaction, and they can undergo further reactions to create other types of products. In this case, I'm looking at this figure from Brewer's Journal from Canada, and basically these are just people. Honestly, this is a really good, I guess, just easy look into what the Maillard reaction is. I'd recommend checking out this site if you want to learn more. But basically, these reductones can undergo further reactions and they create further aromatic compounds and colored compounds, which give food, or in this case, they're interested in beer, its taste. Um, we've kind of already seen enough, but just in case you're interested, here's the arrow pushing mechanism of the first part of the Maillard reaction and what's happening there. You see that this amine group is attacking that carboxyl. The arrow pushing is happening. I'm not going to explain it because I haven't taken OChem in a long time, and quite frankly, this is giving me PTSD a little bit. But now, another image just kind of showing that, these are very complex reactions, especially something to mention is that they're non regioselective, or in other words, they just aren't controlled. When you're doing chemistry in a lab, such as when I had to do OChem lab, you're combining very specific amounts of two chemicals under very specific conditions to make sure you get a very specific product. But obviously, when people first started heating food, they didn't know what type of chemistry they wanted to do. So they just, I guess, have this whole vast amount of products that happen. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, some of them might not even contribute to the taste and form anyway. So that's just to say that there's a lot of complexity that comes into the Maillard reaction, which is, as I mentioned, a whole host of reactions which creates the taste and aroma from the food that we know and love when we cook it. So looking at just a general layout, when I say Maillard reaction, this is like the host of reactions that are going on here. And as I mentioned, with like the specificity of reactions going on in like a OChem lab versus when you're searing meat in a pan, you have this whole host of reactions going on. And just to give you an example, if we're looking at this diagram here, if we're looking at A and B, just the first two reactions that could happen, if you take the simplest amino acid, so there's 20 amino acids, if you take the simplest one, which is glycine, doesn't even have an R group, it's just two hydrogens there. If you take glycine and react it with glucose, which is just one of many sugars which are possibly present in food, just from reaction A and B, there's 24 possible products that could be made. So when you go through the entire cycle of using glycine and glucose, you would probably get hundreds of different types of products. And then when you expand that to all 20 amino acids and all sugars that are possible in foods, you can easily see how many different varieties of products are made and how it's a very complex set of reactions to study. And even to this day, when I was looking up, I guess, information for this video, it's still not super well known. All of the stuff that's made in the Maillard reaction, as I mentioned, some is good stuff, makes the food taste better. Some probably doesn't do anything. Other stuff is actually kind of bad for us, but I'll get to that. But the key thing to the Maillard reaction, or these set of reactions that happen, is that you need to get to a temperature of 140 Celsius to roughly 165 Celsius, or for the Americans out there, 280 to 330 Fahrenheit. And this is the main reason why microwaves aren't as good, in my opinion, and why they don't give you as good of tasting food, because they don't reach these temperatures. And when I say temperature, it's really just saying the average kinetic energy of the molecules in the thing I'm talking about. So the temperature of the food doesn't reach above roughly 100 Celsius in a microwave, meaning that the average amount that the stuff is moving around in the microwave food isn't fast enough. There isn't enough collision between sugars and amino acids happening with enough energy for them to be able to react and create those Maillard reactants or Maillard products, I guess. And that is why it's a lot better to get easier, good quality flavor and taste when you actually cook something, because microwaves just simply don't get up to that temperature. And that's slightly not true, especially today with how much microwave food is incentivized and people like it because it's easier. And that's not to say I don't eat microwave food. Obviously, I'm human and I hate making food for myself. So there are some days where I do use a microwave. But when you do use microwaves, you generally don't get above 100 Celsius, and the amount of Maillard reactions that happen. There are certain conditions where maybe it's better than using or actually cooking the food yourself on a stovetop. But generally speaking, I think it's pretty safe to say that just cooking your own food on a stovetop will make it more tasty than using a microwave. The reason being is that microwaves use oscillating electromagnetic waves, which basically flip water and make it just basically spin very fast in the microwave. And through friction, like if you have some other molecules next to the water and is spinning really fast, it could transfer some of that energy to, for example, if you have a sugar here and an amino acid here, you could transfer some of that energy from this spinning water molecule as it's spinning. But the thing is, once it spins fast enough and it has enough kinetic energy, it would rather not be a liquid anymore and it turns into a gas and it no longer is able to, I guess, have that friction to heat up the sugars as well as the amino acids to create Maillard reactions, meaning that generally less of them happen when you microwave food. Now, I said this is not necessarily the case because now there's a bunch of browning agents, whether it be the type of stuff that you microwave in is better at, I guess, retaining some of that heat so you have uniform browning around the food, as well as you could have stuff even in the food, which is just good at absorbing microwave radiation and just have that heat be absorbed in the food for more than if you were just relying on the water to heat stuff up. So I'm not saying that Maillard reactions don't happen in the microwave, but it's just a lot easier to have them happen on the stovetop when you know that you're going to hit like 300 degrees Fahrenheit of cooking heat, I guess. But yeah, now getting into, I guess, why any of this matters at all. So Maillard reactions, they obviously create the compounds that are make our food taste good, make it more appealing to us. But there's also some byproducts that are harmful. So if we look at, for example, asparagine, if you combine it with sugars and heat as is required for the Maillard reaction to take place, you can get acrylamide, which is a known carcinogen and not good for you. Translation, not good. You don't want acrylamide in your food, but it's just one of those byproducts that happens to also form when you undergo the Maillard reaction. This is a cancer causing. So companies nowadays, when they're making food, there's heavy scrutiny and regulation over the temperature at which they make their food and process their food, since depending on the temperature you use, you could create more or less of these harmful, potentially carcinogenic or molecules which have adverse health effects on people. So the Maillard reaction is very helpful in that way in industry where you're trying to create food which not only tastes better but also is better for you. It isn't carcinogenic in that way. But one way in which you probably wouldn't realize the Maillard reaction could affect your health in other ways is the fact that non-enzymatic modification of macromolecules in your body, such as I mentioned earlier, enzymes or other types of proteins or lipids or nucleic acids can happen, where basically you have sugars added on to places where they shouldn't belong. So, for example, I'm going to show you an image from my honors thesis, which, by the way, if you haven't seen it, I have a video on my channel talking about my honors thesis. I'd recommend checking it out. But essentially, my topic is just talking about nicotinic acetylcholine receptors and how they function. And I'm just going to show you a nicotinic acetylcholine receptor here. What you can see is it's spinning around here is that you have these, I guess, red and gray blobs, which are on the five colored subunits of the receptor. These red and gray blobs are sugars that naturally associate with the receptor and are needed for normal function of that receptor. However, if you have sugars that are incorporated in spots where they shouldn't be on this receptor, then you could impair the function of it. And this doesn't have to be just this receptor. It could be any other enzyme, any other protein of interest, which is required for a healthy living cell. So you could have Maillard reactions happening on the proteins in your cell or other types of macromolecules in your cell, leading them to have these macromolecules that aren't functioning as they need to and cause disease. And this is just, I guess, another way in which we think that aging might be caused is through Maillard reactions, which I think is just a very interesting diversion from where Maillard initially started the research at, which is just studying why or what happens, what causes like the browning on food. And now we're going into maybe it could help us with our health. So just I guess the main points of the video, the moral of the story is I hate microwaves. I don't like microwave food, but also the science isn't straightforward. And this is one of the key reasons why I think it's I guess key for us to further fund scientific endeavors, scientific research, because we never know what type of I guess findings could correlate to what sort of potential product in the future. In this case, Maillard never once thought that him trying to find out why food becomes brown when you cook it is going to relate to potentially how health is impacted by these reactions which could happen in your body. Which, by the way, I mentioned that these reactions happen at very high temperatures. Obviously, your body isn't ever 300 degrees Celsius. But if you're taking the average temperature of a cell, for example, you are going to have parts of the cell which are quote unquote very cold, where you don't have a lot of molecular motion happening, and some points are going to be very hot, where you have a lot of molecular motion happening. So just because your body isn't at 300 degrees Celsius doesn't mean that these reactions can happen from time to time and cause some real damage. And yeah, as I said, this is one reason why we should continue funding research. We never really know when we're going to find something that is useful to help, I guess, in our fight of aging, which, by the way, I mentioned this in the last video, but I finally finished this book. Very good book. If you're interested in how aging progresses, I was talking about how the Maillard effect could be linked to aging. This book talks about how reactive oxygen species and free radicals could contribute to aging. Highly recommend. But as always, I hope that this deep dive into why the Maillard effect means that microwave food sucks, in my opinion, was intriguing or insightful to some of you. And as always, I hope you guys have a good one.